Hello everyone, this is Ranting Politics, and this is the audiobook for Space Relations by Donald Barr. Today we'll be covering Part 3, Section 17. It was curious that no one in the mines or in Barracks L had mentioned that Kosar, or at least Tregast, had a rainy season. But when morning after morning the slaves trudged up to the pit head through flowing mud under a limp plash, and evening after evening trudged down to the barracks in the same uncooling vertical downpour, stories of old prodigies began to spring up among slaves who had been in the lager for a number of years. Of mudslides that swept barracks off their foundations, of great fungi growing on pallets, of poisonous vapors that crept up from the fens, of the water in the mines gaining on the pump until it was knee-deep and work had, for once, to stop. Craig, who had seen the river on the far side of the hill flowing in dry weather a few meters below the open adit to the mine, knew of a worse danger and knew that he could not speak about it. Too many of the slaves were on edge. Someone would blurt out his fear, the back exit to the mine would be rediscovered and closed off, and Craig would be found, and there was no reason at all to hope otherwise, put to death. But if he did not speak, and if the water sluiced into the adit, down the broken drifts and into the main workings during the workday, then hundreds of slaves might die for his silence. The rain intermitted, and the frowning nimbus cloud overhead sometimes fractured to let Kosar's sun, setting or rising when Craig saw it, shine redly through, but the intervals were brief. At night, Craig listened to the drum roll of rain on the barracks roof. All during the day he strained to detect the first sounds of a killing inundation from the back of the old workings. All right, that was Part 3, Section 17. Now we are on to Section 18. Craig lay awake. The night was torrential. In the darkness, so thick that not even the outline of the barracks and the windows could be seen, and with the hollow percussion of the roof, and the stench of sweat, the long upper room of Barracks L could have been the hold of the slave ship. Craig half expected to hear the whistles for the call. There was a tangle of voices, soft yet not furtive, outside the locked door. The noise of a key, 2 phosphor torches like the eyes of a nervous monster, turning this way and that, and moving along between the dense rows of pallets picking out the naked, recumbent bodies. 4 men by the footsteps. Had they found Pornak? A voice, not a man's but a young woman's, Craig remembered it, said, "I feel quite the little mother." A man's voice, unknown to Craig, "How can your ladyship stand the smell?" "My dear Commandant, it's a delightful smell. It's the smell of my food, my standard of living." Another voice, Corey's mezzo-soprano, added, "And yours." The Commandant, "Well, I don't hang around the stockyards before lunch every day." Corey, "How then can you run them well, Commandant?" "We are not latifondisti." Evidently her ladyship was holding one torch, the Commandant the other. The 4th member of the party remained silent, probably a guard. Every slave lay as if asleep. Craig began in a conversational tone, "My lady, I think you ought to know that there is—" Both torches turned on him. In the beam of one, the snout of a guard's laser carbine appeared. The other torch, the Commandant's, threw its beam wildly upward and then fell like a club on Craig's temple. Through the gush of pain, Craig heard her ladyship say sarcastically, "Neatly done, Commandant. Thank you. Now, what do you think I ought to know?" Then he must have passed out. All right, that was Section 18, Part 3. Next we are on to Section 19. He woke up next morning at the usual time, ate, relieved himself, and stumbled through the drenching rain to the pit head entirely as usual. Lady Morgan Sidney, Dr. Corey, and the Commandant were nowhere to be seen. He was not summoned. He was not questioned. No slave mentioned the episode. Only a headache and a painful swelling showed that it had even occurred. How tactful you all are, he said cheerfully to some barracks mates as the lift cracked downward. They stared dully in various other directions. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? The pumps labored against the increasing seepage. The puddles grew deeper, merged, grew deeper still. A film of water slipped continuously over the rock faces. The slaves were pulled back from one drift and then another as the water deepened and the wet-hewn ore became too heavy for the trestles. The light shorted out in one gallery and then another. Here and there a pump failed or a hose parted. Craig wielded his pick and listened for a sound he had never heard, that of an inundation. What he did hear, suddenly, was the same trio of voices he had heard in the night. Dressed in a guard's helmet and a sleek, clinging black waterproof suit, her ladyship led the group. The commandant still carried his phosphor torch. Dr. Corey, bulbous, epicene, was dressed in a white suit, but his trousers were tucked into black boots. 3 massive guards with laser carbines and stun pistols brought up the rear. The party splashed along the gallery toward Craig. Craig, glancing at them as he pulled his pick from the vein, found his eyes engaged at 20 meters distance with those of the lady. He pulled his glance away as if he were freeing his pick. They reached him, and he spun to face them, dropping his pick, and remarked, "As I was saying, your ladyship should have been warned that there is an open passageway into this mine from the far side of the hill, and we may be flooded at any moment." As he spoke, the commandant was reaching back to take a laser carbine from one of the guards. The lady said evenly, without turning her head, "Don't make the same mistake twice, Commandant Fentress." And to Craig, "Continue." Craig put on the diplomatist's manner that, when was it, had earned him the sobriquet, the insufferable boy. "Some time ago, my lady, there was a cave-in, and a drift above this fell into one at this level, and a drift above that fell into that. The uppermost of the 3 galleries runs all the way to the far side of the hill and opens on the slope, only 2 or 3 meters above the surface of a river. In the dry season, that is to say. If the river rises very far, this mine is done for. The water will come in the adit and down into the lower drifts. I do not consider your ladyship safe at this moment." "Is this true, Commandant?" "Of course not, your ladyship." The commandant paused and then seemed to feel that he ought to support his assertion. "Do you think if there was a back way out of the mine, the workers wouldn't all have escaped?" Her ladyship transferred her gaze to Craig. "My lady, the upper gallery that led to the opening is sealed off by a heavy metal partition, but the cave-in took place behind that partition, so the way is quite clear from here to the opening. I should be very happy, my lady, to lead you to it." He flicked a glance at the smoldering commandant and smiled into the lady's wide, ambiguous eyes. "I frequently take the air out on the slopes on nice days." "That's," began the commandant. "It sounds interesting," her ladyship cut in. "Lead on. And, doctor, see to it that Commandant Fentress restrains his exasperation." The expedition set out, Craig in front, the lady second, Dr. Corey and the commandant together, and the 3 taciturn guards. Craig led as directly as he could to the tunnel where he had killed Pornack. The water was ankle deep. They came to the end of the trestle, the end of the hose, the end of the lights. "You're walking into a trap, your ladyship," said the commandant. "You'll rescue me, won't you, Commandant?" her ladyship answered. "Meanwhile, lend me that versatile torch of yours. I mustn't drop it in the water, must I? I do hope," she added sweetly, "that this is as advertised, slave." Craig said nothing. They came to the flimsy barrier. Craig pulled it aside. They came to the rubble. "Would your ladyship mind," said Craig, shining her torch slightly upward. "Thank you, my lady." He put his foot on the debris that covered Pornack's corpse, set his face, and began to climb. The lady proved nimble enough in following, the commandant less so, Dr. Corey graceful but wheezy, and the stolid guards, impeded by their weapons, clumsy. "The air here is remarkably foul," said Dr. Corey. I would almost have said decomposing organic matter. The ventilation is adequate, said the commandant. The group struggled in single file to the uppermost level and rested for a moment without speaking. Craig gestured to the heavy partition. The lady nodded. The commandant looked at it with narrowed eyes. Craig turned and started off toward the pale light that entered from the outside, stopped, and looked down. A small stream of water was crawling along the floor from ahead of them, and as Craig stared at it, it seemed to fill out and quicken. "We'd better hurry, my lady," he said. "We may be too late." He plunged onward, and the rest ran after him. "There," he said. They came up and crowded into the opening. "As advertised," said the lady softly. The daylight was gray, the sky lowered. The valley was filled with rain and scudding haze. The runoff had gouged out soil and scrub on the facing slope, leaving vertical gashes in which the mud streamed down, and the river, reddish-brown, swirling, lapped busily at the sill of the entrance in which they stood. A wave sent a small rush of water among their feet, and along the adit, and another, and then a larger wave. And even as they watched, it was clear that the river was rising steadily. "Commandant Fentress," said the ladyship, "you lose." "My lady," Craig began, and then shouted, "Watch out!" A great wave front, like a comber, was rolling down the river. Something had happened upstream. A dam break, or a rock slide, and a mass of water was on its way. One end of the comber boiled along the hillside next to them, and then was on them. Water up to their waists struck them numbingly. The lady was flung backward and down. Her head went under water. The doctor floundered and hung on a guard. Another guard fell. Craig groped in the seething flow, seized the lady under the armpits, pulled her up, and held her against him, bracing himself against the side of the tunnel. The first surge passed. The level of the inflow subsided to ankle level and steadied, and as the noise of the river's onslaught abated, they could hear the progress of the water into the mine. A booming gurgle, a vastly amplified retching sound, a muttering resonance. Craig released her ladyship and began again. "My lady." "We had better make our way up this slope," said Dr. Corey. "We have a better chance on the outside." "My lady," said Craig. "Right. We'd best get going," said the commandant. Craig said loudly, "There are hundreds of your slaves in that mine. Are you going to drown them, my lady, along with your overseers, with your guards?" Her ladyship watched the bubbles riding swiftly on the current down the adit. There was a kind of preliminary fury in her eyes. "Give me one of the guards," said Craig. "Whichever is the least stupid. Let me go in and warn them." She answered, "Commandant Fentress will go. They will believe him. He will take charge." "Your ladyship," said the commandant, "it would be suicide to go back in there now." The lady reached out and took the laser carbine out of the hands of the guard who had managed to keep his weapon. She pointed it at the commandant. "Possibly. So you have a choice between possible suicide and certain execution. Guards, remove the commandant's weapons and your own." "Good. Throw them in the river." "Well done. Now, Commandant Fentress and you 3 guards will go back the way you came and clear the mine. Guard, take this torch. I shall be perched on the slope above this entrance. If you come back, I shall kill you with this impressive piece of ordnance. Forward, march!" The lady, Dr. Corey, and Craig watched them splash, desperately intent, diminishing figures in black, along the tunnel and past the curve. The lady turned to Craig. "As the commandant observed, we'd best get going. I know you can lift me, but can you also lift the doctor?" Inside the slick waterproof, the lady's body was full and soft, but for the most part slim, and Craig had no difficulty in holding her aloft until she could be sure of a footing above the lintel of the entrance. The doctor was another matter. Craig could not lift him, but managed to remain upright and steady while the obese creature stood on his shoulders and scrambled up, the lady dragging at the white suit, Craig pushing at the huge buttocks. By this time, the water was at Craig's knees. He looked up expectantly, but no hands were extended down for him. "Are you two all right up there?" he called. "Yes," came the doctor's high voice. Craig waited a few moments. "Are you going to leave me down here?" he called. "Yes," said the doctor's voice. All right, and that was Part 3, Section 19. Now we are on to Section 20. "Well," said Craig aloud, "there it is. Do a favor and you lose a friend." The water was well over his knees and pressing him back into the adit. He held on to the jamb of the entrance and listened. At one moment, he thought he could hear the whistle of the alarm deep in the workings. The next moment, he was sure it was only one of the noises of the water cascading down the broken rock. An object came rustling down the unseen slope over his head, and for an instant he thought it might be her ladyship, but it was only a small object, a round black shape that rolled and soared out over the lintel, plopped into the river a couple of meters away, and floated like a buoy. It was a guard helmet. Her ladyship had lost her hat. Craig watched it move slowly away from him, revolve in an eddy, and then move hesitantly into the current entering the mine. It approached. He lifted it out of the water. It was too small for him to wear. He loosened the chin strap as far as it would go and slipped his left arm through it. It hung securely behind his shoulder without rubbing the abrasions left by the doctor's boots. He turned his attention to the jam. It was made of heavy timber, weathered and cracked, and there was a large mortise about waist height where a lock bar had fit. He grasped the timber in both hands and jumped up, trying to catch his right foot in the mortise, but slipped down, scraping his foot. He tried again, this time getting his foot in at an angle. Slowly he worked one hand up and then the other, forcing his right leg straight until he got a good handhold on the lintel. He supported himself diagonally with his left hand and right foot, scrabbling the dirt away from behind the lintel with his right hand. No one interfered from overhead. Finally, he made a solid purchase for both hands back of the lintel, hoisted himself up, and lay exhausted on the slope, bracing his toes in the crevices he had dug for his fingers. He looked up the slope. The pair had begun to climb the steep hill and had made some 30 meters progress. It was evidently dangerous going, and they had had no chance or no stomach to look back. Tufts of wet ferts, moreover, gave him fair cover. The rain had thinned to a drizzle. The sky had brightened somewhat. Craig lay and studied the advance of the pair above him. The enormous backside of Dr. Corey heaved and rolled incessantly in the most dramatic fashion. Her ladyship's winsome fundament moved more efficiently and only occasionally. The doctor, then, was slowing them down nicely. Craig drew himself to his knees behind a clump of gorse, stood up, surveyed the terrain as far as he could, and dropped quickly back to the prone position. From the direction of the gullies washed out by the rains, Craig guessed that the two were headed straight for one of the highest points on the crest of the ridge. There was, he was sure, a low saddle to the right of this point. By climbing diagonally to the right, then, he could get over the hill with a much gentler climb than they. The danger would come if they reached their high point in time to see him cresting the ridge to their right and below them. They would be in a position to enfilade him neatly with the laser carbine, for the lady still had that. He began to crawl upward and rightward. The wet vetch, or whatever it was extraordinarily slippery, and Craig understood why the man and the girl above him continued to crawl painfully instead of attempting to walk. Any slide might well end up in the river, as the helmet must have shown them. After a few minutes, he saw the doctor roll over to a sitting position and the lady, held steady by her companion, rise shakily to her feet. She scanned the slope below her. Craig had been traversing a deep gully, and the gingerliness of their movements gave him time to arrange himself in it so that no part of him, not even the helmet behind his shoulder, showed. He waited, and then cautiously raised his head. The pair were climbing again. Craig found that, following his shallower gradient, and in his bare feet, he could manage a crouching lope without slipping and without undue noise. He advanced by darting from bush to bush, resting in gullies. He drew almost level with them. They were 60 or 70 meters to his left now and sitting up, resting, their heels dug into the ground. The rain had plastered down the girl's fair hair, and the exertion had heightened her color, so that she looked very young, a schoolgirl picnicking with her uncle. The fat man looked woebegone in his drenched white suit, and his small, podgy hands wandered over himself, scratching and pulling the fabric away from his skin. Craig, behind some wind, had to lie flat if he was not to be seen, but managed to move crabwise into a gully. A trickle of water coursed down it. He slipped the helmet off his shoulder and let the rainwater run into it until he had enough for a few swallows. The pair were turning over to resume their climb when the girl slipped. The doctor made a frantic grab to catch her, but it had happened too suddenly. She slid back, rolling over and flailing with her hands to catch sprigs of furze or vetch. But the slide toward the swollen river continued. Meter after meter, she tumbled down the vast, tilted wasteland like a child's doll flung away. A doll with a furious life. The vegetation gave her no traction. It ripped her glossy black suit, so that areas of golden skin appeared, streaked with red. She caught at a shrub and lost it, caught at another and held on. Its roots began to pull out, but she had broken her slide. She dug in with a toe and lay still. She had not uttered a sound. Slowly she raised herself on hands and knees and drew one knee up. Then she lurched upward into a wild, digging run, her arms flung wide, upward and upward, almost dancing. A display of nervy grace that made Craig's eyes smart with tears. She reached Dr. Corey, who still sat in terrified stasis, his eyes staring, his lips drawn back from his teeth. She flung herself down and rolled over on her back. She slammed her heels into the ground. She crowed with laughter. "Oh, Corey," she shouted. "Did you see me? Oh, it was wasted on you, you poor old Capone." She lay back. Craig lay back in his gully, trembling, and let relief spread through his body. Then he resumed his watch. The girl sat up, said something to the fat man, and wiped her hands on his white jacket, leaving bright smears of red. The doctor seized her hands and examined them. She pulled them away with a shake of the head, wiped the water off her face with the back of one hand, decorously tucked one jaunty white breast into her torn suit, slung the laser carbine over her shoulder, and gave a command. The two resumed their climb. Craig said to himself, "What is it? Not sadism, not exactly. Grace, joy, arrogance, and pain." He began to work his way up the gully he had lain in. The slope of the hill was noticeably less steep now. He was approaching the crest. He paused to check the lady and the doctor. They were nowhere to be seen. Craig hunkered down in a wet, sandy hollow among some bushes. By herself, the girl might conceivably have reached the hilltop and disappeared behind the crest. The fat man could not have moved that fast. The two must show themselves somewhere soon. Rustling. Craig crouched. He could not determine the direction. More rustling, and nearer. There was no stealth about it, but the climbers could not be seen. Wheezing. The girl's voice quite near. "Isn't this easier?" The eunuch's alto. "Not noticeably." The girl. "Maybe not for you. You have your suit. I'd rather get sand in my belly button than thorns." Corey. "Cannot we rest?" The lady. "What, again?" "When we get back to the castle, I'm going to put you on a strict regime of exercise." Corey. "At the rate we are going... Look here, I have got to rest." The lady. "All right. Up there, where this ravine ends." Corey. "I told you, it is not a ravine, it is a gulch." The lady. "Pooh, I've seen gulches. Maybe it's a fosse." Corey. That is possible. Oof. The doctor exhaled a large, countertenor sigh of relief. Why do you go on lugging this pop gun? The lady. Because you're too weak to. Corey. It looks very heavy, and we will not need it. The lady. What makes you think that? Corey. You are thinking of the incompetent commandant? The lady. If you were in his position, wouldn't you be afraid to have me reappear? You'll see. He'll be sitting on a guard tower with a high-powered ray. Corey. Such a thing has not happened since your father. The new punishment drugs. The lady. Quite so. The new punishment drugs. What has he got to lose? Corey. You would use those for incompetence on a free man? The lady. Why not? Is it worse than using them on slaves? Matter of fact, I've often thought of using them on you. Corey. Please. The joke is in poor taste. But you are right. The problem in owning slaves is that you cannot get excellent work from free men. If all the horrid labor is done by slaves, what can happen to the incompetent free man? It is too bad we did not bring that slave. We could have run him out to draw the commandant's fire. The lady. No use crying over spilt milk. The commandant can say he thought we were escaped slaves. We don't look like proprietors. Craig had now located the speaker's voices. They had crossed behind him, somehow failing to spot him, and were now to his right and below, hidden from view in what must be a deep gully. He thought he could make his way over quietly enough to take them by surprise. The lady. Did you hear something? Corey. I was not listening. What was it? The lady. Well, listen now. Corey. I heard something. The lady. What? Corey. What's that? The guard helmet dropped to the ground a few meters below them and rolled into a small hollow. Good afternoon, said Craig pleasantly, jumping down from behind them. The unslung laser carbine lay between the two. He rolled over on it and scrambled away with it in his hands, covering them. Forgive my dropping in like this. I had hoped to create more of a sensation, but your ladyship figured out the helmet too quickly. You're a very shrewd young ladyship. Doctor, would you be good enough to fetch the lady her hat? Thank you. Please continue with your discussion. I was about to suggest that we run the doctor out to draw the commandant's fire, as presenting a better target. Corey said, You are bargaining then. A good Tehran. What are your terms? Craig. Not bargaining, no. You wouldn't keep your end of the bargain. No reason to. A good Khazarian. No, I'm just going to live from minute to minute. I won't get down the other side alive unless you help me, and you won't get down the other side alive unless I let you. The lady, to Corey. I told you he was dangerous. Craig. Thank you, my lady. I shall endeavor to give satisfaction. All right, and that was part 3, section 20. God, so much alliteration. Like, there's so many repeated consonant sounds that they keep tripping me up. Like, what was that one? The unslung laser carbine lay? Like, that got me like 3 times. But I feel like a lot of these sci-fi writers, like, they write for scholars, basically. Like, there's so much vocabulary in here that I am not familiar with, and I've read a lot over the years, a lot of fiction, especially, like Stephen King and Rice, and none of them talked like this. Like, I don't understand what it is with, like, old school sci-fi and just using so many words that the reader has no idea what they're talking about. But anyway, hopefully I will have another episode ready for you in a timely fashion, starting with Part 3, Section 21. I hope to see you then. This is Ranting Politics. Have a nice day.